Okay, so good afternoon to everyone in the channel. Welcome to Think and Thank again. Happy to have you here. And before throwing at you this very long college class I watched on YouTube, from this very popular professor, which of course is more popular than I, much more popular. Before starting that video, I want to make an addition to it because the subject he was talking about was so interesting, and it included many information that is this type of information that opens your eyes, and in such a funny way, such a lovely way with this religious stories. But before throwing you at the video, if you want to watch it, I'm gonna summarize it a little bit while I add something that I found very valuable to add, because it works as a way of understanding the world, okay? But today, instead of complaining about how the world is lacking values, how the world is losing many traditions and many good people that we saw in previous times, today I'm gonna try not to do that, okay? Today we're gonna play, we're gonna play the game of being pro-capitalist for a moment, right? To be pro-system, right? Because the system we live today seems that is helping so much some people. They're becoming so happy with the results they get. And the thing is that I want to underline, to add to this video I'm going to put at the end of this presentation, is that the thing is that Professor Jordan Peterson in this class is talking about this idea of status quo, of established institutions, of how we live in a world made of such an accumulation of magnificent institutions, magnificent traditions, magnificent systems that were developed by people that were so smart, right? But the thing is that these people is dead. We live in a world built by dead people, right? And Professor Peterson was talking how the pharaoh in ancient Egypt was this conjunction between the traditional world, the institutions, the good things that the past left us, with the new government, right? With the leadership, with the new god Horus, that defeated Set, and that was the god with the eye, right? With the power of observing, of making changes, of detecting the corruption that we see on the traditional things, right? And that the traditional things were represented by the god that was killed by Seth, but then revived, which was Osiris, right? The blind god. He was willingly blind, representing this idea that we live in a world built by dead people that is not here anymore to help us to navigate through these new challenges we find after the changes we experienced, right? But the thing I wanted to add is that this is even worse, because nowadays, because of capitalism, because of globalization, because of the access to information, because of the access to powerful tools to invest, we are not longer living in a world that was built by people who died, but even worse, we live in a world where the new people that can manage and become executives of these things left by people who died, they die too, but very quickly, and in a spiritual sense, like biologically nowadays people take longer to die, but spiritually their lives are very short, because in the past we could observe that the world was run by people that have enormous values.
And I always tell my students, when the soldier came to Normandy, June 6, 1944, the casualties were tremendous, the explosion, the chaos, the blood. But a soldier who was hiding in one of the trenches didn't look at himself and say, I'm such a loser. I'm such a blemished, defected American. They sent me into this Gehenna to punish me. No soldier said that. The soldier said, I was sent to defeat Hitler. Of course there's casualties. Of course there's conflict, because I'm fighting Nazi Germany. I was chosen. I wasn't punished, I was chosen. When I have conflict in my life, do I say, I was punished? Or do I say, I was sent, I was chosen?
Watch the full class at theyeshiva.net.
And like to stay in maybe in one position, in one craft for a long time. They have the value, the dedication to decide to run something or to build things that took decades to build. But nowadays, because it's so hard to find someone who has the values, the discipline, the knowledge, the creativity also, because nowadays we need to run the things in a new way. So we don't only need values, knowledge, we also need creativity from people. And this makes that the employee, the person, the executive that is capable of running things in a proper way is a very, very valuable asset, an expensive luxury. And I won't say luxury because these people are needed, you know, it's like an expensive executive type of person, which when this person is working, right, he easily can negotiate high salary that's gonna be way above what he needs to live and pay his expenses or her expenses, you know, it's gonna be way above that. So he's gonna save a lot, probably get some additional compensations like stock, anything they can negotiate with the companies they decide to run, or the businesses they support, or the government institutions they decide to support. And after that, after a few years, these people is gonna be so rich and so wealthy that the attitude towards life that they are gonna have is gonna switch, especially if they are responsible. Because if you're a person with values and responsible, after you get a bunch of money, you change the way you behave towards your community, because you become someone capable of supporting people in a different way than the way you used to work on. So this means that people spiritually, in a quick way, in a quick manner, they die very quickly. So when we generate someone capable of running things in the proper way, on fighting the corruption that's appearing in all these institutions, in all these traditions, in all this status quo, when we find someone capable of going against that, is usually someone very valuable and that will stay in the position for a little while, maybe a few years, maybe a decade, 2 decades at most, and after that, I won't say will retire, but will move to another realm. You know, spiritually is gonna die. This figure, this individual, this person that was needed to run things in a proper way, and if we're lucky, they will have like some sort of rebirth in a new spiritual way, in a new spiritual form. That will be, but that will be very different, right? And this is very bad. This is very bad because I will just leave you with the class from Jordan Peterson. I think it's more important that you watch that than what I have to say. You know, he has more years of experience and probably more interesting things to share. But I just wanted to underline that. It's even worse than what he says. We are not living in a world of built by deaf people, but even if we bring these deaf people alive by educating new generations, and even we teach these new generations how to operate in a new way, with the new technologies, with the new challenges we face, even if we achieve that, nowadays people die faster because of all the money they can make and because of all the power money has. And imagine if for reaching out this situation of philosophical, of moral enlightenment, you know, of values, of responsibility, if for reaching this position you need to dodge so many temptations, imagine when you become wealthy and you become a target of so many products and some new services, you know, so many sinful things, so many addictions, so many beautiful things that capitalism is creating. When you become rich, all these things are going to jump on you. So imagine having to resist all those temptations in the same way you had to resist temptations to reach the point. where you become like an executive, someone who can run the things in the way that must be run. So that's the thing. Imagine all the temptations these people are going through. So their spiritual life is even shorter. They're gonna die very quickly, and I don't know if the world is gonna be able to keep up this need of all the time needing to create new executives, new people capable of running things in the way these things should be run. Yeah. So it's even worse of what the Professor Peterson mentions in this video. We are not only living in a world built by dead people, but nowadays the executives of this world die much faster, and there's a need to replace them very quickly. So okay, I hope you like the class. I'm just gonna attach it next to this video, and after watching it, remember to leave a like and subscribe. Leave me in the comments if I did something wrong, if I did something right. Tell me how to improve. Okay, and yeah, happy to have you here, and enjoy the class from Professor Peterson.
This is a story that the ancient Egyptians predicated their society on. And to understand this story, the first thing you have to know is what the characters were. And these characters were gods. There's 4 of them. Although the Egyptians had far more than 4 gods. You might think of these as the central gods. And you might think, what is a central god? And then you might think, well, imagine that the gods compete for dominance across time in people's imaginations. And some gods win. And they occupy the primary position of dominance in the hierarchy, in the dominance hierarchy of gods. And those are ideals. And ideals compete across time for dominance. And they're embodied. And so when diverse tribal people come together, they throw all their gods into the ring and they fight across time, and something emerges as a victor. And that's the emergence of monotheism out of polytheism. And it parallels the development of a unified morality within each of us as we develop across time. And the God that emerges as dominant across time bears a substantial resemblance. Imagine you have a set of gods in this locale that are competing across time, and something emerges as dominant. And then over here you have another set of gods that compete across time for dominance, and something emerges. You'll see major commonalities across the 2 things that emerge. And the reason for that is because the process of emergence that gives rise to both of them is similar in both situations. And that's part of what accounts for the cross-cultural similarity of high-order religious ideas. All right, anyways, you need to know the characters. Osiris. Osiris is the old king. He's Dumbledore for all intents and purposes. He's the old king. He's the spirit that established the Egyptian state when he was young. He was a great hero, but now he's old. And he's archaic, and he's willfully blind. That's Osiris. He has a brother, Seth. Seth is Set. And Set is Satan, because the word Satan comes from the word Seth and Set via the Coptic Christians. So he's a precursor to the Western idea of Satan. You have Isis. Isis is queen of the underworld, and Isis was the goddess of a religious structure that prevailed across thousands and thousands of years. Isis. And you have Horus. Horus is a falcon, and the Egyptian eye. Everyone knows that eye, right? The eye with the open pupil. That's Horus. And Horus is a falcon because falcons can see way better. They can see better than us. They can see better than anything else except for perhaps eagles. And they fly above everything. Zazu in Lion King is Horus, right? And Mufasa is Osiris. And Scar is Seth. And there's no specific representation of Isis, but the closest there is in that story is probably the Queen of the Hyenas that's played by, who's the actress? Yes, Whoopi Goldberg, that's right, because she's like the queen of the underworld, right? She's the queen of the hyenas that live out among the death. But, okay, anyways, Seth, Osiris, Seth, Isis, and Horus. Here's how the story goes. Osiris is a great king. He established the Egyptian state. You could think about him as the embodiment of Egyptian custom and tradition. You could think about him as the thing that the pyramid represents. All right? But he was great when he was young, but he's not young anymore. He's old, and he's willfully blind. And what that means is that he doesn't see what he could see. He refuses to see what he could see. Why is Osiris old and willfully blind? Because that's what culture is. It's a paternal spirit that's old and willfully blind, and it's always that way, always that way. And the reason for that is because it's a construction of the dead. The dead aren't alive. They can't, so they're out of date, and they can't update themselves anymore. And you inhabit their corpse. And that's actually what happens in an earlier story that I'll tell you next week. The early Mesopotamian gods inhabited the corpse of their father, roughly speaking. Anyway, so Osiris was great and when he was young, but he isn't young anymore. He's old and he's willfully blind. He won't look where he knows he should look. He doesn't have the energy, or maybe he doesn't have the spirit. His brother Seth is not a good guy. And Osiris knows it, but he underestimates his malevolence and power. And so Seth wants to rule the kingdom. So what does that mean? It's easy. Every stable society is threatened by willful blindness and malevolence, always. Every bureaucracy has that proclivity to stagnate and to become blind. That's why corporations die all the time. That's why a Fortune 500 company only lasts 30 years. It's why we have to have elections. It's to stop the dead from staying in control for too long. Osiris turns a blind eye to Seth. Seth is happy about that. Same thing happens in the Lion King, roughly speaking. Seth one day waits for Osiris to make a mistake and to be weak, and he attacks him and he chops him up into pieces. And he distributes the pieces across the entire Egyptian state. In fact, the Egyptians regarded their provinces as pieces of Osiris's body. Okay, so now you can't kill Osiris because he's a god. And why is he God? A god because he represents the spirit of structure. And there's always structure. It can't be destroyed. It always reconstitutes itself. It can be hurt and broken into pieces, which is exactly what happens to Osiris. Things fall apart. Why? Because they get old and because malevolence undermines them. That's what the Egyptians were trying to sort out. Okay, so Seth distributes his Osiris all over Egypt so he can't get himself back together. Right? Things fall apart and they can't be brought back together. But the spirit of Osiris still lives in the pieces. So what happens? Order is demolished. What would you expect? Chaos emerges. That's Isis. Isis is queen of the underworld. She's Osiris's wife. Order and chaos, just like the yin and the yang. Order collapses, up comes the queen of the underworld. She's looking for order. Chaos cries out for order. She's looking for order. She goes all around Egypt trying to put Osiris back together. It's a state of chaos. She finds his phallus. She makes herself pregnant with it. And what does that mean? Well, it means it's like Geppetto in the belly of the whale. That thing has the potential to reemerge. The thing that collapses into its pieces is still alive. It can unite with the chaos and produce something new. That's the story of the dissolution of structure into chaos and then its revivification. Isis makes herself pregnant. She goes back down to the underworld. She gives birth to Horus. Horus is the Egyptian eye. He's the son of the great father and the great mother. He's a messianic figure. And in fact, much of the mythology that described Horus was extracted without much modification and then attributed to Christ. Very much, and you can read about the parallels. You can read about it online if you want. But there's any number of parallels. And of course, there is the mythology that the Jews came out of Egypt, and of course the Christians emerged from the Jews. And so there was a tremendous influence of Egyptian thinking on the development of these later ideas. And you see pictures of Isis with Horus on her lap that are virtually identical in content and form to the later pictures of Mary with the infant Christ. And that's the holy mother of God in the hero. It's not a Christian motif. It's far deeper than a Christian motif. It's a human motif. So Isis, queen of the underworld, gives birth to Horus, and Horus grows up outside the kingdom. Why? In the underworld. Because that's what human beings do. You're alienated from your culture. Always. Why? It's old and dead and corrupt. And so that leaves you growing up in chaos. What would you call? Alienated from your fundamental culture. That's the story of adolescence. Horus grows up. He can see. That's what differentiates him from Osiris. That's why he's a falcon. He goes and has a fight with Seth. And now the difference between Osiris and Horus is that Horus does not underestimate Seth. He knows exactly what he's up against. He goes and has a terrible battle with him, trying to get his kingdom back. Something else that's echoed in the Lion King story. And while Horus and Osiris, or Seth are fighting, Seth tears out one of his eyes. Now why? Because Seth is the embodiment of destruction and malevolence. And no matter how conscious you are, if you encounter that, even voluntarily, the probability that it's going to damage your consciousness is extraordinarily high. That's why people don't do it. So the eye is torn out, but Seth is defeated, and Horus banishes him to the nether regions of the kingdom. You can't kill him. Why? Because the malevolent, destructive force that threatens states never dies. It's always there. You can only remove it temporarily. Now Horus is king, Pharaoh, king, God. He's got his eye, and so you think, well, he's going to just pop that back in his head, and then he's going to be able to lead. He's going to be able to take his place at the uppermost pantheon of gods properly. But that isn't what he does. He takes his eye and he goes back to the underworld, just like Pinocchio going into the depths to rescue Geppetto. And down there is the spirit of Osiris, who's extant as a kind of half-dead ghost. And he gives Osiris his eye. Now Osiris can see. So what does that mean? You go down into the chaotic, when threatened by malevolence, even to the point of damage to your consciousness. You go down into the chaos and you find the dead spirit of your tradition and you give it vision. And so, provided with vision, Osiris regenerates, and then Osiris and Horus go back up to the world, linked together and rule jointly. And the Egyptians believed that the Pharaoh, who had an immortal spirit, was the embodiment of the conjunction of Horus and Osiris. And that's what gave him sovereignty. And so you think about how brilliant that is. The Egyptians are trying to puzzle out who should lead, who should be Pharaoh, and what do you have to be if you're going to be Pharaoh in order for things to work. You have to be awake to malevolence and chaos, and you have to embody your tradition. And that puts you at the highest pinnacle of the dominant structure. And that's the same as, it's the same thing. It's the same thing as the battle between the gods across centuries or eons and the emergence of the highest possible moral virtue as a consequence of that competition. It's the eye on the top of the pyramid, right? It's, you know, in the Washington Monument, there's a cap on the Washington Monument. The top of the Washington Monument is a pyramid. At the top of the pyramid is a cap. It's made out of aluminum. And the reason it's made out of aluminum is because when they made the Washington Monument, it was the most valuable metal known. And so what does it mean? It means there's a pyramid and there's something at the top of it. But the thing that's at the top of the pyramid isn't the same as the rest of the pyramid. That's the thing. The pyramid exists. There's a dominance hierarchy. Something climbs up to the top, but it's not just at the top of one pyramid. It's at the top of all of them. The thing that rises to the top of any given pyramid is the same thing that can dominate all pyramids. It isn't good enough to be the best at a dominance hierarchy. What you want to be is the best at the set of all possible dominance hierarchies. Right. And that's the thing that's gold at the top of the pyramid, and that's the eye. That's what the Egyptians figured out. And what does that mean? It means the thing that puts you at the top is attention. Pay attention. Keep your eyes open. It's not the same as thinking. It's not the same thing. It's like watching. And the thing about human beings is we can see. We can see better than any other creature except birds of prey. And so our capacity to see is in fact what we use in the world. Our brains are actually organized around vision, unlike most animals. Their brains are organized around smell, not us. We can see. We stand upright so we can see a long distance. And in our ability to see is what saves us and what saves our communities. And that's what these stories are trying to portray. And you might say, well, why didn't people just say so? And the answer to that is because they didn't know. It took a long time to figure it out. Forever. It's taken forever to figure it out. It's part of what I hoped when I wrote this book, and part of the reason that I'm teaching it is because it seems to me that it would be useful for everyone to actually understand this instead of just having it told as a story. It's like, that's great, man. Yes, you need the story. But why not also just understand it? So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to understand this. So that's good enough for today.